You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. The frost was gaining strength, and the snow underfoot responded with a ringing, crisp groan. Large, diamond-like scatters of stars were sprinkled across the world, gazing down upon the snow-covered earth. George hurried toward his home doorstep. His face burned from the cold, and the piercing chill penetrated the thick fabric of his padded jacket, clinging to his skin. Only his feet, wrapped in spacious felt boots, retained their life-giving warmth. His path led from the house of an old comrade. A friendship rooted in their earliest years bound him and Peter. All sorts of things had happened on life's journey, but Peter was always there in times of trial, extending a helping hand, supporting him in whatever way he could. Most often his support was silent, for Peter lacked the gift of eloquence, unable to put sympathy into words. However, in most cases, words weren't needed anyway. Peter was one of the few for whom George remained loyal to his native Alexandrovka. Although his grown children, long and firmly established in the city bustle, persistently called their father to live with them. "Just think how much easier your life would be there," his daughter Sarah urged. "All the conveniences of civilization in an apartment, no need to break your back over a garden. Your income will be enough for utilities and all sorts of entertainment. You can go to the cinema, the theater." "Where would I go from my native nest?" George stubbornly resisted. "And what about the house?" His son Michael picked up. "What's in it? Old, dilapidated. Always patching the roof or fixing the fence or something else. So much trouble with it. But in an apartment, it's bliss. You'll live like a king." "A stone cage," George insisted. "What would I do there? You're always absorbed in work and I'll sit alone like an owl." "We'll visit you more often," Sarah argued. "You live 150 kilometers from the city. It's not easy to visit you." George just sighed heavily, shaking his head negatively. No, he wouldn't leave Alexandrovka. It was hard to explain to the children. They were so modern, so pragmatic. There was, of course, common sense in their words, but how could he part with the house that had become a part of him? He remembered how his grandfather and father had built it with friends and relatives. All of Alexandrovka participated, for the day before his grandfather's previous home had turned to ashes. Lightning struck the roof directly. The new house turned out no worse, solid, sturdy, exuding the scent of resin and fresh wood. And then, many years later, when young George, after serving in the army, decided to get married, his grandfather passed the house on to his only grandson. He himself moved in with his son. George still remembered his grandfather's words. "A man must bring his wife into his own home. A wife must feel as secure behind her husband as behind a stone wall. Then you will find happiness." And George tried with all his might, so that Helen would feel protected beside him and know no worries, simply enjoying a happy family life. Helen. He met her in childhood, a pretty girl with serious blue eyes and two thin braids, tanned, in a light pink sundress and worn dusty sandals, and always with a thick book under her arm. That was how George first saw his future wife. At that time, of course, he couldn't even imagine that she was his destiny. George himself was no more than 10 or 11 years old then. He, Peter, and several other village boys were heading to the pond. A fishing rod on his shoulder, a light bucket in his hand, pants rolled up to his knees, a stretched-out t-shirt. A whole summer lay ahead. Holidays had just begun. Loyal friends were beside him. George's mood was elevated, light, and carefree. And then, there she was, standing by the front garden next to Grandma Ann's house, thoughtfully watching a cat with kittens, a newcomer. George had never seen this girl in Alexandrovka before, and something about her captivated him even then. Something made him stop to look more closely at the fragile figure. The other boys didn't notice the stranger. They walked past just as they had been going. But George, he felt even then that this girl was not just a random passerby on his path. Hey, what's up? Peter turned to his friend. Why are you frozen in the road? Let's go. At that moment, the girl raised her huge blue eyes to George. It was as if he was struck by lightning from head to toe. The boy, surprising himself, blushed to the roots of his hair. Coming, coming, he shouted to Peter, and rushed to catch up with his comrades. Later, he learned that the girl's name was Helen, and that she would now live with Grandma Ann because something terrible had happened to her parents, and they were gone. Opinions differed here. Some boys swore they had run away, abandoning their daughter. Others spoke of a terrible tragedy. Still others told stories about how Helen's parents got lost in the forest. Later, it turned out that the girl's mother and father had died in a car accident. They were going to the city in a passing car. The driver lost control on a slippery road, and Helen was sent to live in the neighboring village with her only relative, Grandma Ann. Upon learning what had happened to the girl, George felt deep pity for her. He couldn't even imagine how terrifying it must be to lose both mother and father in an instant. After the boy was told about Helen's fate, he wanted to protect her and bring her joy. Only the boy didn't know how to approach the girl. Seeing her from afar, he rejoiced at this pleasant meeting and felt very shy. And generally, George had never been good at talking to girls. They seemed to him like vredny and haughty creatures. But Helen was definitely different. The boy felt it. Helen spoke to him first. This happened near the end of summer. George had climbed a tree to rescue silly Fluffy. The little neighbor's kitten was always getting into scrapes. This time, too, he got scared of dogs, climbed a tall oak, and couldn't get down. He sat at the very top and wailed in a thin voice for the whole street to hear. How could he just pass by? George, of course, climbed up to save the hapless Fluffy. He scratched his chest and stomach on the rough bark, but he saved the animal. You climb trees skillfully, the boy heard a quiet voice behind him. He turned around and met the approving gaze of huge blue eyes. It was her, Helen. It's nothing special. The boy was again overcome with shyness. How cute. Helen's attention shifted to Fluffy. Can I hold him? Of course. George handed the kitten to the girl. She began to gently stroke the animal's gray fur, calling him various affectionate names. And somehow, without noticing, they started talking. George no longer remembered what about. He thought they discussed cats at first, then moved on to dogs. After that, Helen told him about her life with her parents there, in the distant large village. The girl missed her mother, her father, and also her old friends, her school. So much longing sounded in her voice and showed in her eyes. George immediately promised to introduce Helen to the boys and girls of Alexandrovka. He assured her that good, cheerful people lived here too, just so he wouldn't see that sadness, just so he could make Helen smile. And George kept his promise. Very soon, the girl became part of their cheerful, noisy company. She went with the Alexandrovka children to the river and the forest, played football and Cossacks and robbers, sat by the evening bonfire outside the village. Helen turned out to be a very quiet and thoughtful girl, and also smart and curious. She knew so much, noticed so many things. George openly admired the beautiful girl. Then, at the age of 10, he, of course, didn't yet understand what was happening to him. He couldn't even guess that it was love, and for life. Summer flew by quickly. The school year began. Helen became George's and Peter's classmate. Time passed. School friendship gradually grew into mutual love. After 9th grade, George enrolled in a technical school to become a mechanic. Helen, forever an excellent student, became a student at a medical college. George and Helen were already openly dating then, going on real dates, driving to the city to walk around, kissing. No one was surprised. The couple formed very naturally, as if it couldn't have been otherwise. And then George went into the army, and Helen waited for him for 2 whole years. She wrote letters, even came to visit her beloved several times. In the army, George finally grew into a man. Upon his return, he immediately proposed to Helen. She, of course, gladly accepted. That's when his grandfather gave the young couple this house, the house where George was now meeting his old age. Unfortunately, alone. How much he missed Helen. Every day, every moment. Sometimes it seemed that she would come out of the kitchen right now, rosy-cheeked, cheerful, smelling of something delicious. She would smile, ask, "How are you?" But that would never happen. George and Helen lived, as they say, soul to soul. They cared for each other. They were happy together. George sometimes felt that he understood his wife without words, and she, him. The newlyweds didn't delay having children. A year after the wedding, they were already nursing their firstborn, Michael. A couple of years later, a daughter was added to the family, charming, laughing Sarah, who looked very much like her mother. George worked on the local collective farm, earned well, enough to live on. Helen worked part-time as a nurse in the village clinic. The children were a joy. Both studied well at school, helped the adults around the house, and obeyed their father and mother in everything. Only one thing clouded George's family happiness. During Helen's second pregnancy, when the happy couple was expecting Sarah, it turned out that the woman had a heart defect. Whether congenital or acquired was hard to tell, and seemingly this ailment hadn't bothered Helen before, but giving birth to 2 children one after another exacerbated the disease. After the daughter was born, Helen began to have periodic attacks. She would suddenly turn pale, her lips would turn blue, and she would clutch her heart. At such moments, icy fear would grip George. He could protect his beloved from anything, a rabid dog, an evil person, the elements, but not from an insidious disease. George and Helen had initially dreamed of a large family, not planning to stop at 2 children. But the doctors said that Helen could no longer become a mother. It was life-threatening. Helen constantly took pills and periodically went to the hospital. Gradually, George got used to this, got used to the fact that the illness was under control, and even almost stopped being afraid for his beloved wife. The children grew up. First, the son left to study in the city. He enrolled in the economics faculty of a prestigious university. On his own, without connections, without money. George and Helen were very proud of their eldest child then. But they also worried about him. How would he manage alone in the city without them? What if he dropped out of school, got involved with bad company? But Michael didn't disappoint. He studied excellently and also worked part-time. 2 years later, his sister Sarah followed in her brother's footsteps. She also moved to the city. And George and Helen were left alone in their native home. Yes, that was the golden period of their life. George remembered it with nostalgia. The children were grown up, living on their own, occasionally visiting with lots of impressions and news. Everything was good for both son and daughter, even excellent. Both their careers and personal lives were going well. George and Helen were proud of their children and happy for them. And they also enjoyed a quiet, measured life and waited for grandchildren. They went mushroom picking in the forest, fished, celebrated holidays with Peter and his wife Nancy. It was good. Then the grandchildren appeared. First, a daughter was born to their son, then a son to their daughter. A new era of family life began for Helen and George. In the summer, the little ones were brought to their grandparents, and they happily looked after their grandchildren. Now they didn't need to work. The happy grandparents could devote all their time and attention to these little wonderful people. Returning from the forest or fishing with the little ones, George could smell the aromas of delicious baking even in the yard. That was Helen, trying for her loved ones while they were out. The man often thought that this was it, happiness, and thanked fate for such a gift, for Helen, for the children, for the grandchildren. The grandchildren grew up and visited Alexandrovka less often. It was understandable. They had their own things to do, their own friends. The children of yesterday had turned into teenagers. Sarah and Michael also didn't spoil their parents with frequent visits. When would they have the time? Work, home, children. Helen and George, of course, missed their loved ones, but they understood them perfectly. Life in the city was like that. The pace was frantic. When George and Helen visited their children, They would get tired of this rhythm in a couple of days and gladly return to their quiet, cozy Alexandrovka, to their beloved home. And then the illness finally showed itself in full force. Helen got worse. The expensive medicines that Michael ordered from abroad didn't help. Treatment at the best city medical center didn't save her. Helen slowly faded, weakening with each day. George saw it, saw everything, understood, but could do nothing. Absolutely nothing. No, he could do something after all. He filled his wife's last days with happiness, light, and joy. Every morning he gave her bouquets of wildflowers, and later, bright autumn leaves. He cooked Helen's favorite dishes, talked with her for hours. They remembered the past, including their carefree, happy childhood. Helen smiled, gently, affectionately. George tried to capture that smile in his memory in the smallest details. One evening, Helen felt unwell. George called an ambulance. His wife was taken to the city hospital. George held his beloved's hand until she was taken to the ward on a gurney. The man never saw his wife alive again. The doctors did everything they could, but it didn't work. George grieved heavily. Everything around him lost meaning. Colors faded. Sounds became somehow muffled, as if coming through a thick layer of water. The children stayed with their inconsolable father for a little while, and then fluttered back into their own lives. It was for the best. Affairs and worries distract from grief, help get through difficult days. Peter stayed with George, loyal Peter. He came every day, sat beside him silently, as always. The friends smoked on the porch, sometimes discussing the news or the weather. Peter's wife, Nancy, also often appeared, always bringing something tasty: pies, goulash, even dumplings. All the things George usually liked. The man appreciated the care of his loved ones. He knew they also missed Helen. All four had known each other since childhood and had become like family over the years in Alexandrovka. Gradually, life returned to its course. George somehow adapted to the new reality, learned to exist without Helen. Although, why without Helen? His wife was always present in his thoughts. He talked to her before bed, shared sorrows and joys. Mentally, of course. These silent dialogues made the man feel lighter, warmer, somehow. The children urged their lonely father to move to the city, closer to them. The money George and Helen had saved would be enough for a cozy one-room apartment. Life in the city, according to Michael and Sarah, would be easier and more pleasant, and they, and their children, and grandchildren would be nearby. They could see each other more often. But George couldn't leave his home, where every corner reminded him of happy years, and the landscapes of Alexandrovka, and the forest, with which the man had become so close over all these years, and his favorite spot by the river, where he went fishing and where it was so good to think, and Peter and Nancy. Finally, silent Peter, who had become a brother to George. No, the man couldn't leave Alexandrovka. This was his place. But how to explain this to his children? They gave logical arguments that were difficult to dispute. George was almost at his gate. His house stood on the edge of the street. Beyond the fence, the snow-covered highway immediately opened up, along which cars now passed very rarely. Further on was a wide field, and behind it stood the forest like a wall, the very one where George loved to spend time. It was already late and cold. The frost seemed to be getting stronger. Tomorrow, perhaps, even school classes would be canceled. Wide, straight columns of smoke rose into the sky from the chimneys. Life was boiling in these houses. Wives were preparing dinner. Children were doing homework. Cheerful, warm, light, cozy. And George? Empty rooms awaited him. Warm ones, though. When he left to visit, the man had thoroughly heated the house. It was quite bright, although there had never been streetlights on George's street. They were mostly in the central part of Alexandrovka, but the light of the full moon, which had rolled into the sky, was quite sufficient. George habitually surveyed the surroundings. That's when he noticed her in the distance, a small, thin, hunched figure of a person. Someone was trudging along the side of the road, slowly, barely moving their feet, either from exhaustion or perhaps this person was injured or drunk. In any case, the person clearly needed help. It was dangerous to stay outside in such frost. George hurried after the solitary figure. For his age, he was in excellent shape and didn't complain about his strength. He could still run very fast. Daily, hours-long walks in the fresh air and physical labor, no matter what you say, were very hardening. This someone was clearly not from Alexandrovka, because they were moving away from the village, trudging directly along the highway towards the city. Were they really planning to get there on foot in such frost? George sped up. The figure kept getting closer, closer. Now only a few dozen meters remained to the person. George had started to suffer from nearsightedness in his old age, but from this distance he could already discern that a young woman was trudging along the road, sinking into the deep snow. She looked a little older than George's granddaughter, about 20, maybe even less, thin, somehow frightened, in a long, fashionable but clearly unsuitable for such weather down jacket, and in light boots with a low heel, which looked completely ridiculous outside the city. The girl was shivering, wrapped in a scarf wound several times around her neck. There were no gloves or mittens on her hands. Her thin fingers were completely numb. "Wait!" George called out to the stranger. The girl turned around. She was pretty, with large brown eyes, a scattering of freckles on a slightly upturned nose. Short chestnut curls peeked out from under a knitted hat. The girl flinched in surprise, clearly not expecting to meet anyone on the deserted road. Then fear appeared in her eyes. George understood. If the girl could only do it, she would immediately dash forward, run away. But the stranger was clearly already exhausted. She could barely move her legs. "Don't be afraid of me. I won't do anything to you." George tried to speak as gently as possible. "You need to get warm. The frost is getting stronger. The nearest village is 25 kilometers away. You'll freeze." The girl stopped. She understood that George was right, but she seemed to see no other way out. The stranger looked completely desperate. "Something happened?" George asked sympathetically. He knew that letting this girl go was equivalent to abandoning someone to certain death. "Yes," the stranger finally said. Her voice trembled. She was clearly holding back tears. Do you need help?" "Yes," the girl nodded again. It seemed she was afraid to say anything more than this short "yes," because then she would no longer be able to hold back the tears. "Well, that's good. Let's go to my house now. You need to warm up quickly. Your cheeks are completely frostbitten already. We can think about how to help with your trouble there." The girl hesitated. It was understandable. Going into the house of a stranger met at night on a deserted highway was a risky decision, but she had no other way out, and the stranger nodded briefly in agreement. "Excellent. My house. It's very close. Look, there it is. By the road." George spoke in a calm, ordinary tone, trying to reassure the young woman a little. The stranger walked a little behind George and looked around fearfully. Her whole body was tense. She was ready to run away at the slightest sign of danger. In the yard, old Rusty ran up to George, wagging his tail. A dog who had served as the house guard for almost 15 years. Loyal, smart, kind. He sniffed the guest and barked a friendly welcome, as if inviting her in. The girl smiled, stroked the dog's head, and the tension that had gripped her seemed to ease a little. George was pleased with this change. Maybe the stranger would finally speak and tell him what had happened to her. It was clearly some dark story. The house was warm. George turned on the light, led his guest to the kitchen, and seated her closer to the stove, which was still radiating heat. The girl needed to warm up. She had spent so much time in the cold. The stranger clearly enjoyed the warmth and comfort of the village house. She took off her hat and scarf, but she was in no hurry to unbutton her coat. She hadn't warmed up yet. George put on the kettle. He kept talking about something so that the heavy, awkward silence wouldn't hang in the air. "I'll brew some mint tea now. You'll warm up from the inside and calm your nerves a little." "Thank you," the girl mumbled. Thank you for not leaving me there. Well, how could I do otherwise? George wondered. It happens differently. While I was walking along the highway there, several cars drove towards the city. I waved my hands at them, but no one stopped. It must have been scary, probably. A person on a deserted road, somehow suspicious. Not suspicious, but strange. That's for sure, George cautiously remarked. My name is Vicky, the girl suddenly introduced herself. And I'm George Johnson, or Uncle George, whichever is more comfortable for you. That's what my grandfather was called. The girl smiled weakly, taking a mug of steaming, fragrant drink from George's hands. He was the only one who cared about me. It's a pity he died early. So much sorrow, so much longing was in those words that George's heart ached. I'm sure you're mistaken. You have a mother, a father, don't you? Do you really think that even they are indifferent to you? Of course, Vicky replied confidently. They don't have time for me. My father left the family when I was 12. He fell in love, decided to build a new life for himself. And voila. Now I have 3 younger sisters, and my mother. I just get in her way. She sometimes dates someone, but she can't bring anyone home. Because I'm there. I'm in everyone's way. With these words, Vicky took off her down jacket, and George couldn't help but gasp in surprise. His eyes were met with the girl's round belly, covered by a black sweater. His guest was expecting a child, and judging by the size of her belly, the term was already quite advanced. Yes, I'm pregnant, Vicky sighed, noticing the host's reaction. What's so surprising? I'm of age, if that matters. Nothing. That's even very good. Children are happiness. It's just that now I don't understand anything at all. How did you end up on the highway at night, and in such a condition? Oh, it's a very long story, the girl sighed. But we don't seem to be in a hurry. Will you tell me what happened? Of course, if you want. Vicky grew up in a poor family. Mother, father, older sister. Her mother worked as a shop assistant in a store near their home. Her father worked at a factory. There was enough money for the bare necessities. Inexpensive clothes from the market, simple food, utility payments. But there were no funds for travel, or for quality cosmetics, or for a fancy phone for their daughter. Everyone around Vicky lived like this, but television showed a completely different reality. And the girl dreamed of one day becoming as rich, successful, and beautiful as the heroines of films and TV shows about that colorful world. Vicky's sister, Hope, also aspired to success. She studied well, tried to win at competitions, dreamed of entering a medical university and becoming a successful, sought-after cardiologist. Subsequently, she managed to achieve this plan. But such a path seemed too long and difficult to Vicky. And where was the guarantee that she would succeed? It was possible that all her efforts would go to waste. No, such a prospect did not suit young Vicky. The girl inherited thick chestnut hair and large brown eyes from her father, and a magnificent model figure from her mother. The girl rightfully considered her advantageous appearance her ticket to life. It wasn't that difficult for a beautiful young girl, Vicky thought, to find a rich man. And then a completely different life would finally begin. The unfolding prospects were simply breathtaking. Study better, the responsible Hope instructed her younger sister. Depend on a man your whole life? What's good about that? That's definitely not for me. But it's perfectly for me, Vicky smiled back. And what's not for me is slaving over textbooks for hours like you do. I'd rather watch videos on how to apply makeup to highlight my best features. You don't need to highlight anything. You're already a beauty. I know. After 9th grade, Vicky left the school she hated. To get her mother off her back, the girl pretended to enroll in a culinary college. The competition there was the lowest, and it wasn't bad to know how to cook well. After all, everyone knows that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Ultimately, the fact of studying at a culinary college played a significant role in Vicky's fate. This happened just before she was about to graduate. The girl was doing her internship as a cook's assistant in one of the city's most popular restaurants. Hope helped her get a placement in such a place. Her older sister had already graduated from university, started working as a doctor in a private clinic, and had acquired good connections. The owner of the restaurant was Arthur, a young man from the Armenian diaspora. Tall, athletic, fit, always stylishly and expensively dressed, impeccably polite to the staff, witty, cheerful, and at the same time very, very handsome. Black eyes, an elegant curve of his lips, a noble arch of his eyebrows. Arthur was twice Vicky's age, but that didn't stop her from falling in love with him. Here he was, the man of her dreams, rich, handsome, successful. With him, she could go through fire or water. Nothing was scary. But the observant girl immediately noticed a wedding ring on Arthur's finger. Yes, of course, Arthur was married. Later, the girl learned from the restaurant staff that he was also a father of many children, raising 3 daughters. For a long time, Vicky only cast loving glances at her idol. Not all of them escaped the eyes of the restaurant staff. An attentive waitress named Olivia noticed the impression Arthur made on the young intern. "You're in love, aren't you?" she asked directly one day. Vicky was flustered by the unexpected question and answered truthfully, "I think so." "No wonder Arthur is handsome, of course, and you, by the way, are quite his type." "What do you mean?" "It's very simple. He likes them like that, thin, young, graceful, and big-eyed." "But Arthur is married. Who has that ever stopped?" Olivia smirked. "Tell me honestly, are you afraid of the role of a mistress? Because he definitely won't leave his wife and children for you." "I'm not afraid," Vicky replied. At that moment, she truly didn't care, as long as she could be near Arthur. "Well, then I can arrange a date for you. Arthur, he himself asked me to talk to you, to test the waters, so to speak. He liked you too." Vicky couldn't believe what she heard. Her head even spun. Arthur, this prince, this king, her idol. Had he really noticed her and even asked Olivia to talk to her? Wow. Of course, Vicky gladly agreed to the date. The first meeting took place in some huge country mansion. Everything was mysterious and romantic. Arthur sent a car for Vicky. The driver took her out of the city to that very mansion. Luxury. Everything in that place was luxurious. The girl felt as if she had stepped into a movie about the beautiful life, one of those she loved so much. Arthur was waiting for Vicky in a gazebo decorated with lanterns and flowers, right next to the pool. The stars shone brightly in the sky, and he looked at Vicky with admiration, interest, and smiled. All of this made the girl's head spin. Was what was happening real? Or was it just a dream, or her fantasies? The doubts dissipated when Arthur approached her and gallantly took her hand. The warmth of his palm. It was definitely real. That evening, so unusual, so romantic, so fairy tale-like, Vicky completely lost her head. Arthur turned out to be even more perfect than he seemed from afar. Intelligent, sensitive, perceptive. In some incredible way, he guessed all of Vicky's desires and fulfilled them almost instantly. And the way Arthur looked at her. That gaze made the girl feel wonderful, unique. Next to Arthur, Vicky felt like a queen. Arthur didn't spare any gifts. Expensive jewelry, branded cosmetics, elite perfume. The girl's dreams came true. Vicky now bought clothes in boutiques from famous fashion houses. These things. They were strikingly different from everything the girl had worn before. In dresses and jeans from renowned couturiers, Vicky felt luxurious, irresistible, stunning. The admiration in the eyes of others, and most importantly, in Arthur's dark eyes, further convinced the girl that she was beautiful. Arthur, he was so gentle with her. The dominant, rich man treated Vicky like a fragile flower or a crystal vase. It was so pleasant to be near him, to inhale his scent, to feel the warmth of his hands, to hear his low voice with a slight hoarseness, to see his smile, a kind, charming, warm smile. They usually met in that very mansion. As Vicky understood, it was one of Arthur's country houses for recreation. There were many spacious, stylishly furnished rooms, a large gym, a mini cinema, and a pool. Even 2 pools, one in the yard, the other right in the house. The area around the indoor pool resembled a beach setting. White sand, palm trees, lounge chairs. Arthur and Vicky often spent time here. While the girl swam in the pool, Arthur, lounging on a comfortable chair, watched her. The man told Vicky that he admired her graceful movements and sculpted figure. The girl was pleased to hear this. During these meetings, which happened regularly, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice, there was no one in the house, not even servants. Vicky enjoyed the closeness of her beloved and the surrounding luxury, without a care for anyone else. Of course, Vicky understood perfectly well that she was just Arthur's mistress. The man had emphasized more than once how important his family was to him, and at the same time, he looked at her like that. Her presence made him happy. Vicky knew this for sure. Everything else was not important to her yet. "You probably condemn me?" Vicky asked her attentive listener, lowering her gaze. "It just sounds like that. But you see, I knew Arthur was married, and I still agreed to this relationship, and with joy." "Not at all, honestly," George replied. "You are just a young girl, and he is an adult, married man, the owner of a large business. He is to blame for this, as a man, as the older one. Perhaps you are right. But then I didn't blame Arthur for anything. On the contrary, I felt sorry for him. I saw that he loved me. At least, that's what it seemed like to me. But I understood that Arthur couldn't leave his wife and children. His relatives wouldn't understand or support him. Arthur said many times how important the opinion of elders and relatives was in their family. They would never forgive him for such an act. Well, that's why I felt sorry for him, and loved him very, very much." One day, Arthur told everyone that he was going on a business trip. In reality, he decided to arrange a vacation for himself and his young mistress. They rushed off to Thailand. They went from the cold February straight into the hot, sunny summer. Winter was ending and had already become quite tiresome for everyone. Snow, frost, slush. And suddenly, after just a few hours on a plane, Vicky found herself in a summer fairy tale with her beloved. Luxurious beaches, mesmerizing views, warm turquoise water. Vicky and Arthur could finally appear together openly everywhere, in restaurants, at discos, and simply on the streets of the resort town. They looked magnificent. Vicky knew it. Handsome, masculine Arthur and she, fragile, happy, tanned. Arthur publicly hugged the girl around the waist, held her hand, and even kissed her. For the first time, they weren't hiding. It was an indescribable feeling. Vicky had never felt so happy. In Arthur's strong, reliable embrace, she forgot about everything, even about the fact that her beloved man was married and they would soon return home, where Vicky would again have to be content with rare meetings and feel like just a mistress. Deep down, the girl harbored hope. Hope that Arthur would eventually leave his wife for her. It sometimes happens. Why shouldn't this miracle happen to them? Only something had to happen that would help Arthur decide on a desperate step. There, in Thailand, the man once confided in Vicky. They were returning from the beach. It was late at night. Arthur and Vicky loved swimming in the dark when there were few people on the beaches, so they often returned to the hotel after midnight. And now they were strolling along the water's edge. Water dripped from Vicky's long, wavy hair. She hadn't had time to dry it with a towel. To be precise, she simply chose not to. Arthur once confessed that he adored looking at her wet hair. It reminded him of a beautiful mermaid, so the girl tried for his sake. The moon shone brightly from the sky. It was somehow unusual here, too large, naturally yellow, as if painted. A fantastic sight. Muffled music came from somewhere near the pier. A disco must have started at the bar. "What are you dreaming about?" Arthur asked his companion thoughtfully. Vicky pondered. Should she tell the truth? Confess that she only dreamed of falling asleep and waking up in Arthur's arms, cooking him breakfast, seeing him off to work, ironing his shirts? Wouldn't that sound too boring? What if Arthur thought she was clingy? No, Vicky couldn't let that happen. "I dream of traveling a lot. Traveling around Europe, visiting some exotic countries, seeing with my own eyes what I've only heard about before." "A wonderful desire," Arthur approved. "I'll help you fulfill it. I like the idea myself." "And you? What do you dream about?" Vicky asked in return. The answer stunned the girl. "I dream of a son," Arthur confessed. "More than anything in the world, I want to have a son. But my wife and I only have daughters. I adore them. My daughters are my life. I'm proud of them. I love them. But I continue to dream of an heir." "I would never have thought that." "Why?" Arthur smiled. "I thought you dreamed of opening a new chain of restaurants, starting some new business, building an empire." "Oh yes, many people think so. No one imagines that most of all in the world I dream of a son, a continuation of my lineage. I've already thought of a name for him. Sometimes I look at toys in the boys' sections, and then I go to the pink shelves with dolls to please my daughters." "You sound like a wonderful father," Vicky sighed and thought about her own parent. He never bought dolls for her and her sister. What about dolls? The indifferent father couldn't even say with certainty what grade his daughter was in, or when their birthdays were. Vicky thought a lot about that conversation on the shore later, and gradually a decision formed in her mind, a bold one, perhaps even reckless. She would fulfill her beloved man's dream. She would give him a son, as handsome and intelligent as Arthur himself. At first, the girl herself was frightened by her thoughts. Arthur had told her directly that he wasn't going to leave his wife and children. Would he be happy about the news of a child on the side? This was, after all, very serious. But one day, Vicky saw how tenderly Arthur treated a little boy, the child of visitors to his restaurant. The little one looked about 3 or 4 years old. He was fussy, sitting in his high chair. He was probably bored, like any child. The little boy wanted to run, have fun, make noise. Arthur, who had popped into the restaurant for a minute, noticed the scene. He walked up to the child, shook his hand like an adult, started a conversation with him, and the little one immediately calmed down, as if he had grown up before his eyes. "You are happy parents," he said to the visitors. "You are raising a wonderful son, a real man." "Yeah, right," the boy's mother chuckled skeptically. Her whole demeanor suggested that she certainly didn't consider herself a happy parent. But Vicky, who had now finished her internship and was working as a waitress in the restaurant, she had managed to notice everything. Arthur's tender gaze at the child, his warm smile. It seemed he really dreamed of a son. This episode helped Vicky decide. She realized it was time to move from planning to action. The girl simply stopped taking her pills. And also, she scoured the internet for ways to conceive specifically a boy. These methods seemed somehow too unreliable. Somehow. Vicky needed guarantees, so she turned to Hope, her older sister, who had graduated from medical academy and certainly knew about such matters. "You have strange interests," Hope said, surprised to hear her sister's question. "Nothing strange. We have a waitress at work. Her name is Olivia. She and her husband are planning their second child. Their eldest is a daughter. Now they want a son. Is it possible to arrange this somehow?" "Well, there is one option," Hope replied. "True, it's not particularly reliable, but it increases the chances of conceiving a child of the desired sex. Although, I repeat, it's a very complex process, and by the way, a lot depends on the man's physiology. But go ahead. I'll write down the calculation scheme for the necessary days for your Olivia. Let them try with her husband. You never know." And Vicky, of course, used this scheme. Everything worked out immediately, on the very first try. 2 weeks after the romantic evening, Vicky realized she was expecting a child. The discovery both delighted and frightened her. But there was no turning back. The girl didn't tell Arthur anything. She wanted to find out the baby's sex herself first, and then surprise him. Circumstances also worked out very well. The man had flown to Armenia with his family for several months. Vicky missed her beloved, and at the same time enjoyed her new condition. It was amazing to realize that a child was living inside her. Not just a child, their baby, hers, and Arthur's. They would have a son. Vicky had almost no doubt that she was carrying a boy. She felt it. Vicky didn't tell her relatives about her pregnancy, and no one was interested anyway. Her mother lived her own life. Her father had completely disappeared from the horizon. Hope had long been renting an apartment in the city center, closer to work. The sisters didn't communicate much during that period. At the appointed time, Vicky went for an ultrasound. With a sinking heart, she awaited the specialist's verdict. "You're having a boy," said the strict woman in glasses, who was moving the sensor over Vicky's belly, which was just beginning to round out. "A healthy, strong boy. Congratulations." Vicky flew home on wings that day. It was on that very day that Hope came to visit them and immediately understood everything. Her sister always had diamond eyes. "Are you pregnant?" she asked quietly when her mother went into the kitchen. "Yes," Vicky nodded, not even trying to hide her smile. "I'm going to have a son soon. Who is his father?" "The best man in the world." "And where is he? Why aren't you with him yet? How are you going to raise the child?" "Dad," Vicky said dreamily, "he's just not in the country right now, and announcing such news over the phone isn't very good. I'll wait for him to arrive, and everything will be decided. Just don't tell Mom yet, or she'll drive me crazy." "As you wish," Hope shrugged. "If you need help, ask. I can't promise much, but I'll help with what I can. Thank you very much." Her mother still managed to wear out her pregnant daughter's nerves. When her belly could no longer be hidden, she noticed and understood everything. How her mother screamed at Vicky then, called her terrible names, threatened her with a hard fate. Then she softened a little, started probing for information about the baby's father. Vicky told her mother the truth, but she didn't believe a single word her daughter said. She decided that Vicky had gotten pregnant by some good-for-nothing and was now inventing stories to justify herself. Now her mother often sighed about her hard fate, complaining that soon her ungrateful daughter would burden her with a parasite. The girl clenched her teeth to avoid useless arguments with her parent and waited for her beloved's return. The day Arthur flew back from Armenia was snowy and cold. January was ending, a long February lay ahead, and after it, in March, in the first spring days, a wonderful baby would be born, a son so long awaited by Arthur. Arthur himself called Vicky, said he missed her very much and dreamed of meeting. As usual, he sent a car for her, which took Vicky to the familiar country house. The man opened the door himself. He was smiling, warmly and very kindly. Vicky simply adored his smile. But very soon that self-charming smile slid off the man's face. Arthur saw Vicky's belly, which could no longer be hidden. Is this what?" he asked with a hint of disgust. "Arthur, I didn't want to tell you over the phone. I dreamed of telling you in person. We're going to have a son soon. A son, Arthur, can you imagine? Your dream will finally come true." The man sank tiredly into an armchair. He seemed to have aged in an instant. From him, it was as if icy cold radiated from him. It was so unusual that Vicky was flustered and frightened. The girl, of course, understood that Arthur would be very surprised, but he looked as if he had just learned of some annoying problem. And what about his talk of a son? Arthur had dreamed of him so much. "Aren't you happy?" Vicky finally ventured to ask. Arthur looked up at her. His eyes were somehow very tired somehow. "Go home," the man said calmly. "Go. I need to think about everything. I'll tell you what to do later." Arthur himself called a taxi. In the house, Vicky held herself together. But in the car, she let the tears flow. A loving person wouldn't have acted like Arthur. They hadn't seen each other for several months, and he sent her away, practically kicked her out. Arthur didn't love her. Before, Vicky felt like a beautiful princess next to this man. Now, Arthur treated her like some unnecessary thing. There wasn't a drop of love or joy in his eyes, only irritation and anger. How could this be? Had he been pretending all this time? Had he just been using her beauty and youth? Vicky didn't want to go home. Her mother was there with her complaints. By the way, in the end, her parent turned out to be right. It seemed Vicky would indeed have to raise the baby alone. The child. Thoughts of him restored Vicky's composure. Soon her son would be born, a Rodnoy beloved person. He needed a strong, sensible mother, and that meant Vicky would be that. Thinking about her little boy, the girl smiled through her tears. Life no longer seemed hopeless. Well, let Arthur not be by her side. But Vicky would become a mother very soon. Even the anticipation of meeting her little one was happiness, and when she held him in her arms, then she would be able to handle anything. Vicky asked the driver to take her to Hope's. She could tell Hope everything. Her sister. She was so smart, so kind. Of course her sister would help her, and Hope helped. She listened, she sympathized. Then she went into the living room and pulled out the sofa bed. "This will be your bed," she explained. "Live here for now. Mom really won't leave you alone, and you can't be nervous now." For a while, Vicky felt safe. She was calm and at ease. Hope supported her sister in every way, buying her vitamins and healthy food. "I want my nephew to be born healthy," the older sister smiled. This made Vicky feel warm inside. She was pleased that someone else, besides herself, was waiting for the baby and even caring. And then one day, Arthur reappeared. He didn't send a car for Vicky. He came himself. The girl was just returning from the store. The man was waiting for her in his car near the entrance. "Hello." He opened the driver's door. Arthur was smiling again. But now, Vicky didn't believe that smile. "Hello," the girl greeted cautiously. "Get in the car. We need to talk." Vicky settled next to him, still the man she loved. She felt his scent again and saw his black, beautiful eyes up close. That familiar, pleasant chill arose in her stomach, a usual sensation. "How are you?" the man inquired. "Is everything all right? How are you feeling? How's the baby?" He was interested in her condition. Did he actually care? Vicky didn't know how to react. Hope stirred in her soul. Maybe that day the news had just thrown the man off balance, and now he had thought everything through, realized he was wrong, and was ready to make amends. "Everything is fine, with me and with our son." "That's wonderful. I have a question for you. You don't think you can raise him yourself, alone?" "If that's how it turned out, then I can," Vicky stated confidently. "Oh, come on," Arthur scoffed. "You don't really have an education and no job either. You can only go back to work in 3 years, and even then, people aren't exactly lining up to hire a mother with a small child. Children get sick, mothers take sick leave. Who needs that?" Vicky still couldn't understand what Arthur was getting at, and he continued. "You practically have no father, and your mother isn't a help either. She lives poorly, and your relationship isn't the most trusting. I know all this. All hope is on your sister, but she won't babysit you forever, and it's unfair to burden a young woman with your problems. She needs to build her own life." Vicky was hurt by these words. The most terrible thing was that every single one of them was the pure truth. "Why are you telling me all this?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with approaching tears. "I'm just outlining your situation, to offer you a way out, a real way out." And Arthur finally revealed his plan to Vicky, a monstrous and inhumane one. He offered me to give the child to him," the girl said quietly, looking directly into George's eyes. It was clearly difficult for Vicky to talk about this. George patted her shoulder encouragingly. "Well, I'll be. What a scoundrel that Arthur is. Poor girl." Arthur said that he had indeed always dreamed of a son. With his wife, he had 3 daughters. It turned out that Arthur had 2 other illegitimate daughters. He had already decided that it was his blood or his genes. And then suddenly Vicky tells him that she is expecting a son. At first, upon learning of his mistress's pregnancy, the man was angry. These were unnecessary problems that he didn't need at all. But then he thought about it and felt joy in his soul. Finally, he would have a son. Arthur had always dreamed of a brilliant future for his heir. He had so many plans for this baby. And if the son grew up with a single mother, he was unlikely to become a worthy man. No, Arthur couldn't allow that. "I'll take him from you. I'll take him into my family. I've already talked to my wife. She's now pretending to be pregnant. We'll tell everyone that he's ours, mine, and my wife's." "No." Vicky shook her head in horror and placed her hand on her belly, as if protecting the baby. "No, this will be better for everyone," Arthur continued. "I'll help you with a job, with an apartment. You'll live a free life, find a rich husband. I know that's what you dream of. With a child in your arms, you're unlikely to achieve that. The boy will grow up in decent conditions. I will give him everything. You won't be able to provide this child with even a small fraction of what I will give him." Arthur's gaze was almost pleading. At that moment, Vicky felt her power over this strong man. Perhaps because of this, she mistakenly thought she could decide something in this strange situation, that she could make a choice. "No," the girl repeated. She couldn't part with her little one. Vicky had waited for him so much, thought about him so much. She already loved her son, loved him with all her soul, with all her heart. And give him to Arthur? No way. Absolutely not. "Think about it anyway," Arthur said finally. "I'll call you later." "There's nothing to think about." "No," Vicky said, and got out of the car. She blocked Arthur's number then, so as not to get upset or worried unnecessarily. At home, Vicky told Hope everything. Her sister's face took on a troubled expression. "This is bad. Very bad," she said. "People like Arthur are used to getting what they want. You need to be on your guard." Her sister was right. Arthur didn't back down. About a week after that conversation in Arthur's car, Vicky was almost kidnapped. They tried to drag her into a van with mud-splattered license plates right on the street. The girl was so scared then. She couldn't resist the strength of the man pulling her towards the open door. A coincidence saved the girl. A police car appeared at the beginning of the street. The failed kidnapper pushed Vicky away, jumped into the van, and sped off. She sat down right in a snowdrift because her legs suddenly weakened and refused to obey her. Upon learning what had happened, Hope was seriously alarmed. "He won't stop." Her sister shook her head. Just then, the phone rang. Someone was calling Hope's phone. The girl answered and then handed the phone to Vicky. "Strange, but it's for you." "Well, hello." Arthur's voice came through the receiver. Alien, cold, harsh. Was this the same man who had called her beautiful, a queen, a miracle just recently? "Please stop chasing me," Vicky pleaded. "I beg you, leave me alone. I will leave as soon as I get my son. You can be free. A car will come for you today. Be ready by 8 in the evening. A person will take you to a private clinic. You will give birth there. They will take the child, and you will be sent home. With compensation, of course." Vicky couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. Arthur turned out to be not a fairy tale prince at all, but an evil, cruel man. And now, it seemed, there was no escape from him. He had money, connections, his own people throughout the city's infrastructure. How could she oppose him, a man who was used to everything being purchasable? And now he was offering her money for her little one. It was incomprehensible. "Well, just think of that," George couldn't help but exclaim, emotions overwhelming him. "It's my own fault." Vicky lowered her eyes. "I wanted a beautiful life, and I got into trouble." "You shouldn't blame yourself." George tried to make his voice sound as gentle as possible. "You were just a young, inexperienced girl and you fell in love with that scoundrel. You were just unlucky." Vicky took a deep breath and continued her story. "Hope called me a taxi at 6 in the evening, 2 hours before the time Arthur had set. She booked me a room in a hotel in the neighboring city. She said that I couldn't give up here if I wanted to protect my child. Hope, as always, had a clear plan. The older sister said that Vicky needed to hold on until the birth. There was only a little time left, just over a month. And then it was important to register the baby as her own in time. Once Vicky was officially recognized as the mother of the child, Arthur wouldn't be able to do anything. Only there were many difficulties in this plan. Firstly, hiding from a person like Arthur, even for a few weeks, was problematic. A hotel wasn't such a reliable place. To check in, you needed a passport. Vicky's details would surely show up in some database. But there was no other way out. She couldn't sleep on the street. And the sisters didn't have any acquaintances willing to shelter Vicky for a few weeks. Secondly, the birth itself. As soon as Vicky went to the maternity hospital, Arthur would immediately find out. He would surely be monitoring such clinics, as he knew that Vicky would have to seek help sooner or later. But Hope will help me with that, Vicky smiled. She came up with a solution. She has an acquaintance, a midwife, who will deliver my baby when the time comes. This woman has a whole room set up in her apartment for such events, so Arthur won't find out anything. And so the sisters' plan took shape. Vicky would go to the neighboring city and live in a hotel until a certain time. When the time came, Hope would come for her, and they would go together to that same midwife. Then Vicky would have to live in the hotel for some more time because registering the baby's documents wasn't an instantaneous process. Well, after Vicky had the child's birth certificate in her hands, she could safely return. But nothing worked out. Vicky shook her head. Hope called me a taxi. The driver took me to another city. But on the way, it turned out we were being followed. A black SUV with tinted windows was relentlessly following the taxi. The driver noticed it. He weaved, tried to shake them off, but the car didn't fall behind. And then the man became worried. "Did you do something?" he asked the passenger. "Why are they following us?" "No, I didn't do anything, honestly," Vicky replied. "I don't like this. I don't need problems." The taxi turned onto the country highway, an empty, snow-covered road. The pursuit continued here. "This won't do," the increasingly nervous taxi driver said. He pressed the gas pedal to the floor and sped forward at high speed. Having broken away from the SUV, the driver braked and opened the door. "Get out. The fare is covered. I won't take your money even though I drove you well. Deal with your problems yourself." "But where will I go?" Vicky was horrified. "A deserted road, frost, darkness, and that terrible SUV will appear any minute." "I have no idea. Wait for that car that's following us. They're looking for you, so they definitely won't leave you on the road. They won't just drive past. And I have to go." Having said this, the driver slammed the door and sped off. Almost at the same time, headlights appeared in the distance. It was probably that SUV catching up with the taxi. Vicky barely managed to hide behind a large snowdrift. The black, terrifying car sped past. The taxi driver's calculation was wrong. They continued to pursue him, thinking the passenger was still on board. "Well, that's basically it," Vicky sighed. "I found myself alone on that highway. Well, I started walking back towards the city. I couldn't freeze on the roadside. And then you found me. That's how it happened." "It's a puzzling story," George said, drawing it out. "But what should we do with you now? How can I help you?" Vicky shrugged. "Here's what," George declared decisively. "You need to rest now. Lie down right here, in the kitchen, near the stove, on this sofa. I'll bring you a pillow and a blanket now." "Really?" Vicky's eyes lit up with joy. It was clear she was very tired and cold. Besides, she had gone through such stress. The thought of leaving the warm, cozy house sent her into a panic. "Of course, really. How else? Tomorrow we'll think about how to help with your trouble. Morning is wiser than evening." "Thank you," the girl exclaimed. "You're welcome," George replied with a smile. "And you, don't be afraid of anything. They definitely won't look for you here." Vicky fell asleep instantly. It was understandable. She had been through so much that evening. Not everyone could handle it. George carefully closed the kitchen door, put on his padded jacket, slipped his feet into his felt boots, and went out onto the porch to smoke. Yes, the girl's situation was difficult. He had to help. George looked at the bright stars and tried to figure out how to save Vicky. The difficulty was that he couldn't go to the police. It seemed this Arthur had everything covered there. Gradually, a quite good plan formed in the man's head. In the morning, George got up early to prepare breakfast. He himself was used to coffee and a sandwich in the mornings, but today he had a guest, and a pregnant one at that. She needed a full meal. So George made scrambled eggs with chicken and tomatoes. Vicky devoured the breakfast and swallowed everything in an instant. "Thank you. It was incredibly delicious." She sincerely thanked him. "You're doing so much for me." "I thought about your situation yesterday," George began the serious conversation. "And I decided. Why go to a hotel where they can find you so easily? Stay with me. They won't look for you here. I'll tell the villagers you're my niece. They know her, our Susie. She used to visit us often when she was a teenager, and you look very much like her, so no questions will arise. But I can't. I feel awkward bothering you like this. Stop that nonsense, George interrupted the girl. It's no trouble at all, and helping someone in such a situation is normal, isn't it? So live here as long as you need, and you can stay with the baby here later until you get the documents sorted out for him. Thank you. Vicky threw her arms around the embarrassed George. Susie, if anyone asks, your name is Susie, the elderly man reminded her with a smile. Yes, I'll remember. And can I call Hope from your phone? I'm just afraid my number is being tapped. I'll tell her how I am. She's worried. Of course. George handed Vicky his mobile phone. And a completely new kind of life began in the small village house. Vicky slept a lot at first. George understood that the young girl's body was fighting stress in this way and tried not to disturb her unnecessarily. The man told the neighbors that his niece Susan had come to visit. She had recently gotten married, was expecting a child, and her husband was trying to finish renovations before the heir was born. So they sent Susie to her uncle in the village for fresh air, so she wouldn't breathe paint fumes. The story didn't raise any questions or surprise from anyone. Only Peter clearly suspected something, but he kept his suspicions to himself. Vicky spoke little, sometimes talking about her life before everything happened. By all accounts, she was, in essence, a child nobody needed. Only Hope, her older sister, and her grandfather George, who died early, cared for her. The girl sometimes called Hope from George's phone. They talked about something in hushed voices. George tried to go to the back rooms during this time so as not to make his guest uncomfortable with his presence. In gratitude for the shelter, Vicky tried to help George with household chores. Sometimes she washed dishes, sometimes she dusted, and one day she decided to bake a pie. True, nothing came of it. The dough was raw inside, burnt outside, and the girl had oversalted the filling completely. Well, I just wasted the food, Vicky lamented. It's nothing, you're still young, George chuckled. And he thought to himself that a graduate of a culinary college should probably be able to cook such simple things. But maybe Vicky hadn't recovered yet from everything that had happened to her recently. After all, she had gone through truly terrible things, and nothing was over yet. The most crucial and dangerous part of the plan lay ahead. George felt sorry for the young girl who had gotten into such a mess due to her inexperience. He understood perfectly well that Vicky was simply looking for love and protection, everything she hadn't seen from her utterly indifferent and cold parents. That's why she fell in love with this Arthur, who was twice her age. Vicky, she was almost a child, just a little older than his, George's granddaughter. Only Allie was loved and pampered, and this girl was practically abandoned to her fate. It was good that she had a reliable sister. It was a pity that Hope couldn't come here to visit Vicky. Her visit would have cheered the girl up. But Arthur's people could well be watching Hope, which is why the sisters preferred to communicate from a distance. George sometimes wondered what would have happened to Vicky if he hadn't accidentally met her on the road that day. She would surely have frozen on the way to the city, or Arthur would have caught up with her. In any case, the girl was very, very lucky that night. Sometimes in the evenings, Vicky's stomach would ache. She would hold it with her hands and listen, calculating something. George understood. The hour of birth was approaching. Sometimes he felt scared. What if everything started right in his house? What would he do then? He could, of course, call the neighbor. Old Martha had once worked as an orderly in a maternity ward. But when was that? George became more and more anxious with each passing day. One evening, while heartily eating the dinner George had prepared, Vicky told the hospitable host the news. "It's time," she said. "What?" George didn't understand. "It's time for me to go to the city, to that midwife we found. She's been warned and is waiting for me. The baby wants to come out, the time is near, and he's kicking so much it's like he's cramped in there." "Well, I'll be." George scratched the back of his head. "So, a new person will appear soon. I've lived in this world for so many years, and it's still a miracle and a mystery to me." "I can't believe it either. Vicky confessed. And to be honest, I'm very afraid of the birth itself. But Hope says that for me, it's like being on a submarine. There's nowhere to go. So, how will you get there? Hope will call me a taxi. I'll leave the day after tomorrow in the evening. Maybe for a day, maybe for a couple of days, however it works out. Then I'll need to stay somewhere with the baby for a while they process the documents and all that. Of course, George understood her doubts. We agreed. You'll come back here with the child. But you need to prepare for the baby's arrival, right? What do you need? A crib, a stroller, clothes, formula, diapers? Hope has already prepared everything. I'll come back with the child and the things, Vicky smiled. Everything will be fine. You're lucky to have a sister like that, George approved. She's a good one, you can tell right away. Yes, that's true, Vicky agreed. I can't imagine what I would do without her. And without you too. That evening, George went to visit Peter and Nancy. There was a joyful occasion. Sammy, their youngest son, had received a scientific degree. The guy had worked towards his goal for a long time, and now he had finally achieved it. The old friends stayed up late, reminiscing about their youth, telling funny stories from their lives. As always, they talked about Helen. Peter and Nancy missed her very much too. Closer to midnight, George went home. He opened the door quietly so as not to accidentally wake Vicky. She was, of course, long asleep. But as soon as he entered the hallway, George heard the girl's voice. She was speaking loudly and clearly, as she thought she was alone in the house. Tomorrow I'll come for the baby. Will he be with you already? No. I need to know for sure. We need to act carefully here. Yes, he agrees. I'll live here with the baby for a while. I'll have to take care of him. It's not easy. So I want to get not 30, but 50%. You're risking more. But I'm not on vacation either. I still have to deal with a noisy little brat, don't forget. George was stunned by what he had just heard. The first thing that grated on his ears was the phrase, noisy little brat. Vicky had spoken with such tenderness about the son who was about to be born. And then suddenly this. It's a dangerous scheme, but we've calculated everything. Our plan shouldn't fail. Everything is thought out to the smallest detail. Vicky continued to say something strange, incomprehensible. What scheme? What plan? What risk? George began to guess that Vicky was not who she claimed to be at all. The man became all ears. He needed to get as much information as possible. Only then would he understand how to proceed. Let's go over the details again, Vicky continued. You, disguised as an orderly, sneak into the maternity hospital and take the baby. You give him a sleeping pill so he doesn't scream. You bring him to your place. I'll be waiting there. I'll take the little one, come back here, and pretend to be an enthusiastic, inexperienced mother. Meanwhile, you contact the family and demand money. As soon as we get the money, we leave the boy at the train station and we fly to Europe. With that kind of money, no one will find us. George was shocked. Vicky, without even realizing it, had just revealed her plan to him. Some things were still unclear, but the man grasped the essence. It seemed Vicky was only pretending to be pregnant. She was planning with someone to take someone else's baby from the maternity hospital in order to get money, and they were using George's house as a place to hide for a while. In the old village house, Vicky and the child would indeed not be looked for. It wouldn't occur to anyone. Perhaps the criminals had learned from someone about the lonely, kind widower and invented such a detective story. They portrayed Vicky as a victim hiding from an evil, influential former lover who wanted to take her child. In reality, they were the ones planning to take the newborn. George stood by the door, listening to Vicky's unusually harsh, cold voice, and frantically thought about what he should do next. He probably needed to turn around, quietly slip out of the house, and go back to Peter's. Together they would find a way out. And now he had to run before Vicky noticed that her conversation had been overheard, because otherwise, everything would be lost. George, without turning around, walking backward, went out the door. Vicky didn't understand anything. The man ran as fast as he could to his old friend's house. Peter and Nancy listened to him attentively, without interrupting. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" Peter asked, surprised. "I thought that girl didn't look so much like your Susie. I was afraid you'd accidentally let something slip, and she told me she was in danger." "Well, I'll be," Nancy said, shaking her head. "You sheltered a bandit in your home." "She's a brilliant actress," George sighed. "If it hadn't been for that accidentally overheard conversation, I would never have guessed." "We need to save the child," Peter declared, "the one they were planning to take. Newborns are so fragile, you never know what this girl might do to him, even if not out of malice. The baby shouldn't fall into such hands." "I know. But how do we save him?" George looked at his friends. "I don't know what to do. In which maternity hospital is this child? Who is Vicky's accomplice? We don't know anything. Even the city where they plan to pull this off is unknown." "We need to go to Officer Bill," Nancy suddenly exclaimed. Officer Bill was the local district police officer. Honest, brave, decisive, with a heightened sense of justice. He would surely know what to do. They didn't wait until morning. They went to the station right away. Fortunately, Officer Bill was on duty. Peter knew this. He had met him near the store the day before. They talked, and the officer said he was working the night shift. Officer Bill was very surprised to see a procession of old friends at his doorstep. "What brings you here? Did something happen?" "Something happened," Peter answered for everyone. George stepped forward and began his long story. The officer didn't interrupt, listened attentively, thoughtfully, asking questions from time to time. "It's quite a story," he said when George finished. "I'll contact my colleagues in the city, consult with them, and you all go home so as not to arouse suspicion. You, George, act as usual, and in the morning, it's best to invent some excuse and go to Peter's place, stay there for the day. If I understood correctly, we're talking about a serious crime." The next morning, George made breakfast for himself and Vicky as usual. The girl chirped happily, telling him about her dream. George tried to smile so as not to arouse suspicion, but it was very difficult. Vicky stroked her fake belly, talked to the non-existent child. Liar. How utterly false, insincere, unpleasant she was, like a nasty toad. And how had George not noticed it before? "I'm going to Peter's," he told Vicky. "For the whole day I need to fix the shed roof. Don't be bored here. Lunch is in the fridge. I'll probably be back by dinner." "Of course," Vicky smiled radiantly. "And I'll pack up, because a taxi from Hope will come for me tomorrow. I can't even believe that in just a couple of days I'll meet my son. It's exciting, of course." George smiled through clenched teeth and hurried to Peter's. He couldn't stay under the same roof with this person any longer. George spent the whole day at Peter and Nancy's. They discussed what was happening, made assumptions about how events would unfold next. It was easier to get through this strange story with old friends. Late in the evening, Officer Bill appeared at Peter's house, tired but cheerful, in a clearly elevated mood. "Well, old rogues, the crime has been solved. We caught those criminals, and we also busted someone else along the way." Nancy gestured for the men to sit at the round table in the center of the living room. When everyone was settled, Officer Bill recounted the incredible story. Vicky turned out not to be Vicky at all. The girl's real name was Catherine. Of everything she told George about herself, only her love for money was true. Kathy had dreamed of getting rich since childhood, but she chose not the most honest path. In her teenage years, the girl stole from supermarkets, got caught a few times, but there was no serious punishment. Then something bigger happened. Catherine participated in a car theft, and here she was lucky. The guy, her accomplice, took all the blame. Apparently he had feelings for the young, pretty girl. Catherine tried to work. Sometimes she worked as a shop assistant in a shopping center. Sometimes she sat at the reception of a fitness center. But very soon, the girl realized that you couldn't get rich quickly through honest means. One day, in a nightclub, Catherine accidentally met an adventurer just like herself. Paula was a few years older and much more experienced. It was she who offered her new friend an excellent scheme at first glance. Paula worked as an orderly in the city's best maternity hospital. There was a paid ward there for especially important people. It resembled an expensive resort, luxurious interiors, high-tech equipment, impeccably polite staff. In this ward, the wife of a major businessman, a well-known person in the city, was on bed rest, and legends circulated about his wealth. Paula knew that the child his wife was carrying was long awaited and hard won. The couple had struggled to conceive for a long time, and now finally a miracle had happened, for which there had been almost no hope left. However, the pregnancy turned out to be problematic, and the future mother had to go to the hospital often. The story of this family was known to all the staff, and Paula, of course, knew it too. The insidious plan had been brewing in the girl's mind for a long time. It was so simple. Take the baby from the nursery, nothing difficult for a hospital employee. And then the parents, frantic with worry, would pay any money for him. Only for such a deed, an accomplice was needed, a loyal person, ready for risk and difficulties. And Kathy, her new acquaintance, was perfect for this role like no one else. Together, the girls thought through the details of the plan. And they learned about George, the widower from the distant village, completely by chance from Allie, the man's granddaughter, Officer Bill recounted. She was telling her friends about her grandfather in a cafe, saying how much he missed her grandmother, describing his kindness. And Paula and Catherine, sitting at the next table, heard all this. Such a completely incredible coincidence. The cunning girls first scouted the situation, making sure that a lonely widower indeed lived in the old village house. The criminals proceeded to act. They played out the scene of a pregnant girl trudging along the road for you. Officer Bill shook his head. And you fell for it. Then she added more nonsense to your ears. She must be a good actress, that girl. You didn't suspect anything? I didn't have any thoughts like that, George agreed. I felt sorry for her. She looked unhappy, lost. And we apprehended that girl, Officer Bill continued. The other day, as if to check documents, saying some unfamiliar girl appeared in the village, has been living here for a month. According to witnesses, that lady's belly turned out to be fake. We ran her documents through the database, and it turned out she was wanted for damaging someone else's property. She slashed someone's tires out of spite. And generally, she had been apprehended for minor things multiple times before. And then we got to this story with the child. The girl is frail. She immediately gave up her friend. And we caught her red-handed at the maternity hospital when she was carrying the infant out the gate. That's where we apprehended her. That's how it happened. Just like in the movies, Nancy exclaimed, clapping her hands. Peter and George sat in silence, unable to utter a word. Not easy, that's for sure. But no time for tea. I need to get back to the station. I just stopped by for a minute to tell you everything. And I still have tons of work, reports to write, and statements. By the way, George, I'll officially summon you tomorrow. Your testimony is needed. All right, the elderly man nodded. He needed time to come to terms with what had happened. It was hard to process. He had become so attached to Vicky, so invested in her story. He felt sorry for the poor, confused girl whose head had been filled with nonsense by an older lover. And now it turned out there was no Arthur at all? She told me such a plausible story about the older lover, described him in such detail. Arthur, Officer Bill clarified, is a real person. She really did try to charm him, and she succeeded. After all, she's a young, beautiful girl. The cunning lady managed to take many photos and videos of their dates, and then she extorted money from Arthur. He paid her. He didn't want everything to become known to his wife, relatives, business partners. And generally, such a reputation was no good for him. That man eventually did go to the police. Well, what a girl, Nancy exclaimed, shaking her head in surprise. A devil in a skirt. By the way, that businessman whose baby they wanted to take, he's very grateful to you, George. He says he'll definitely contact you and shake your hand personally. And not just shake it, I think he'll clearly come with a gift. George felt embarrassed and awkward at these words. What special thing had he done? He just accidentally overheard a conversation and reported it to the police. It was they, the police, who had done a good job. If anyone deserved a reward, it was them. Officer Bill left. Nancy went to the kitchen and started rattling pots and pans, calming, familiar sounds. Peter and George remained at the table. "Yes," Peter said. "Well, well. You probably won't trust anyone at all after what happened, will you?" "Why?" George asked, surprised. "If such a situation arose again, I would do the same. It's better to get burned than to leave a person in such trouble." "You're an amazing person," Peter said, drawing it out. "Well, how about fishing tomorrow morning?" "That's a good idea," George approved.